Somewhere beneath the red clay of South Vietnam, in tunnels so narrow a man had to crawl, the Viet Cong learned to fear the dark. Not because of bombs, not because of artillery, because of the Australians. In captured enemy documents from 1966, a Viet Cong commander wrote, "The mad Australians enter the tunnels alone. They do not fear death. They are phantoms we cannot see. We hear only their breath. And then, nothing." They called themselves tunnel rats, volunteers, every single one. Men who descended into hell armed with nothing but a pistol, a torch, and nerve most soldiers couldn't imagine. Pitch black, waist-deep water, booby traps that could kill you in a dozen ways. And somewhere in that darkness, an enemy waiting, silent, listening for your next breath. This is the story of the Australians the Viet Cong feared most. The ones who fought a war no one saw. Underground. Imagine this. You're on your hands and knees. The ceiling scrapes your back. Mud under your palms. Water soaking through your fatigues. Your torch, if you dare use it, throws a weak beam maybe 3 feet ahead. Beyond that, nothing. Just darkness. And the knowledge that something might be waiting. The Viet Cong had spent decades building tunnel networks across South Vietnam. Cu Chi, Iron Triangle, thousands of kilometers of interconnected passages, living quarters, hospitals, supply depots, command bunkers, all hidden beneath the jungle floor. These weren't simple holes in the ground. They were engineering marvels, multi-level complexes that stretched for miles. Some tunnels went 3 stories deep. Others connected entire villages. The VC could move battalions underground, completely invisible to American reconnaissance planes and helicopters flying overhead. The tunnels were narrow. Most were less than 3 feet high and barely 2 feet wide. You couldn't stand. You couldn't turn around. In some sections, you had to lie flat on your belly and pull yourself forward with your elbows. The walls were dirt and clay, constantly crumbling, constantly threatening to collapse. The air was thin, stale, suffocating. And the heat. God, the heat. Underground in Vietnam, temperatures could reach 40 degrees Celsius. You'd be drenched in sweat within minutes. Your uniform would stick to your skin. Your breathing would become labored. Every movement took effort. Every breath was work. When Allied forces discovered these tunnels, most soldiers refused to go down, and for good reason. The VC lined their tunnels with traps designed to maim and kill. Punji stakes sharpened bamboo, smeared with excrement, angled to pierce your hand, your face, your chest. Grenades rigged to tripwires. False floors that dropped you onto spikes. Pits filled with snakes and scorpions. Concealed firing positions where a VC soldier could wait in total darkness, listening for your approach, waiting until you were close enough that he couldn't miss. And if the traps didn't get you, the tunnel itself might. Suffocation, cave-ins, flooding. The VC would sometimes divert streams into tunnel sections, drowning anyone caught inside. Other times, they'd simply collapse entire passages, burying soldiers alive under tons of earth. But the Australians? They volunteered. One tunnel rat remembered his first descent. You go down feet first, torch in one hand, pistol in the other. And the bloke at the top says, "Good luck, mate," because he knows he might never see you again. Most men would turn back. The tunnel rats kept going. Every movement had to be deliberate, slow. Feel for wires. Listen for breathing. Watch for shifts in the earth. One wrong step, one careless movement, and you were done. You had to use all your senses. Touch was critical. You'd run your hands along the walls, feeling for irregularities. A slight indentation might indicate a hidden compartment. A change in texture could mean you were approaching a chamber. Your fingertips became your eyes in the darkness. Sound was everything. You'd pause every few meters, holding your breath, listening. The drip of water, the scurry of rats, the rustle of fabric. Any sound could mean the difference between life and death. The tunnel rats learned to distinguish between the sound of water dripping from the ceiling and the sound of water being disturbed by movement. They could hear a man breathing from 20 meters away in the confined space of a tunnel. Even smell became a weapon. The tunnel rats learned to recognize the smell of recently cooked rice, which meant VC soldiers had been there recently. They could smell the distinctive odor of fish sauce, a staple of the Vietnamese diet. They could even smell fear, the acrid tang of human sweat in the stale air. American and South Vietnamese forces tried tunnel operations early in the war. Casualties were catastrophic. So they stopped. The Australians didn't. They adapted. They learned. They became the best in the world at something no one wanted to do. One veteran recalled, "Fear? Of course there was fear. You'd be mad not to be afraid. But you couldn't let it control you. You breathed through it. You moved through it. And you trusted the bloke behind you to pull you out if it went to hell? In those tunnels, courage wasn't optional. It was survival." For years, the Viet Cong believed their tunnels were untouchable, safe havens where they could rest, regroup, and strike without warning. Then the Australians arrived, and the tunnels became death traps. In 1966, the Australian task force was deployed to Phuoc Tuy province in South Vietnam. The region was riddled with VC tunnel systems. The province was a strategic corridor between the coast and the highlands, and the VC had spent years fortifying it with underground networks that allowed them to move freely, attack at will, and disappear before Allied forces could respond. Within months, Australian tunnel rats had turned the underground war upside down. A captured Viet Cong report from late 1966 reads, "The Australians do not behave like the Americans. They do not bomb the tunnels and leave. They enter. They hunt us. They know our passages better than we do. We have lost 3 commanders to the tunnel ghosts." Tunnel ghosts. That's what the VC called them. The tunnel rats didn't just explore. They systematically dismantled the VC's underground advantage. They cleared tunnels, destroyed supply caches, captured documents and maps, neutralized command posts, and they did it with a precision that terrified the enemy. Here's how they worked. Silence. Total silence. They moved through the tunnels without speaking. Hand signals only. Every breath controlled. Standard kit. A .45 caliber pistol. A small torch. Maybe a bayonet. No grenades, too dangerous in confined spaces. No rifles, too long, too cumbersome. Just you, your weapon, and your wits. The .45 was chosen specifically for tunnel work. It was powerful enough to stop a man with one shot, but heavy enough that the bullet wouldn't ricochet as dangerously as smaller calibers. The torch was often a simple pocket flashlight, nothing fancy. Some tunnel rats preferred not to use torches at all, relying instead on their other senses to navigate in complete darkness. They'd strip down before entering. No helmet, it would scrape the ceiling and make noise. No webbing, it would catch on roots and rocks. Just trousers, a shirt, boots, and their weapons. Some went barefoot, believing they could feel the ground better that way, detect tripwires and pressure plates with their toes. One tunnel rat explained, "You couldn't fire unless you were certain. The ricochet could kill you. So you waited. You listened. And when you knew, absolutely knew, you acted. The tunnel rats learned to use captured VC weapons. A K-47 seconds. Chinese pistols. Anything they found underground. Why? Because the sound of an AK in the tunnels confused the enemy. They didn't know if it was friend or foe. Psychological warfare. Underground. This was genius. When a VC soldier heard an AK-47 fire in the tunnels, he'd hesitate. Was it one of his comrades? Should he hold his fire? That split-second hesitation gave the tunnel rats the advantage they needed. In one operation near Long Tan, Australian tunnel rats discovered a VC regimental headquarters, maps, orders, lists of operatives, intelligence that saved dozens of Allied lives. The headquarters was elaborate, multiple chambers connected by narrow passages, ventilation shafts carefully concealed above ground, sleeping quarters carved into the clay walls. The tunnel rats found documents detailing planned attacks, supply routes, even the locations of other tunnel networks. This single operation disrupted VC operations in Phuoc 2 for months. But the cost was brutal. Every descent was a gamble. You might find an empty tunnel. You might find supplies. Or you might find an enemy soldier crouched in the dark, waiting for you to get close enough to kill. One tunnel rat survived a firefight in a tunnel near Nui Dat. I came around a corner, and there he was, maybe 2 feet away. We both froze. Then we both fired. I don't know how I got out. Instinct, I guess. And luck. Instinct, luck, and an unshakable will to survive. That's what made the Australian tunnel rats the VC's worst nightmare. The Australians had something other forces didn't. Bush skills. Generations of knowledge passed down from the outback, from the bush, from men who knew how to read the land. And in Vietnam, those skills became lethal. Before they ever entered a tunnel, tunnel rats studied the terrain above ground. They looked for signs, disturbances in the soil, patterns in the vegetation, airflow. One veteran described the process. You'd see a patch of grass growing different, or dirt that looked freshly turned. Sometimes you'd feel a breeze coming from the ground. That's when you knew there's a tunnel entrance nearby. The VC were experts at camouflage, but the Australians were better at spotting it. They used their eyes, their noses, even their sense of touch. Smell the earth. Feel the air pressure. Listen for echoes. Once inside, bush skills became survival skills. Reading airflow told you if a tunnel was ventilated or if it was a death trap waiting to suffocate you. Tracking footprints in the mud told you how many VC had passed through, and how recently. Listening to the sound of dripping water told you where the tunnels flooded and where they stayed dry. The Australians understood something fundamental that other forces missed. The jungle and the tunnels were connected. The same principles that helped you survive in the bush applied underground. Track your prey. Read the signs. Stay alert. Trust your instincts. They'd look at the vegetation above a tunnel entrance. Certain plants grew better in soil that had been disturbed. Others avoided it. They'd watch for insects. Ants and termites would often avoid tunnel entrances, creating small gaps in their trails. They'd observe the morning dew. It would dry faster over hollow ground where warm air from the tunnels rose to the surface. The tunnel rats improvised constantly. They used sticks to probe for tripwires. They fashioned breathing tubes from bamboo. They marked tunnels with scratches in the clay so they wouldn't get lost. When they found a tripwire, they wouldn't just cut it. They'd trace it to see what it was connected to. Often, it would lead to a hidden chamber or a weapons cache. The VC expected soldiers to simply disarm the trap and move on. The Australians used it as a breadcrumb trail to find what the enemy was trying to protect. They learned to read the clay walls. Smooth sections indicated recent excavation. Rough, weathered surfaces meant the tunnel was old. They'd look for tool marks, trying to determine how many workers had dug the section and how long ago. One tunnel rat explained, "We weren't trained for this, not officially, but we grew up in the bush. We knew how to read signs, how to move quietly, how to stay calm when things went wrong. That's what kept us alive." But it wasn't just skill, it was attitude. The Australians brought something else into those tunnels. Humor, irreverence, a refusal to let fear win. After a successful mission, tunnel rats would joke about what they'd found. "Found a bloody snake down there. Bigger than the VC. Mate, I'm more worried about the rats than the Viet Cong." It wasn't bravado. It was coping. When you face death every day, humor became armor. One veteran remembered, "If you didn't laugh, you'd go mad." Simple as that. We'd come up from a tunnel, covered in mud and muck, and someone would crack a joke, and for a moment, we'd forget where we were. That's what kept us sane. They'd give each other nicknames: the Mole, Digger, Ghost. They'd bet on who could stay down longest, who could clear the most tunnels in a week. They'd compete over who had the worst story, the closest call, the strangest find. One tunnel rat found a complete underground kitchen, rice still warm in the pot. Another discovered a hospital, surgical instruments laid out as if the surgeon had just stepped away. One even found a small library, Vietnamese books and pamphlets stacked neatly on shelves carved into the clay. The bush skills got them in and out alive. But the attitude, the Australian refusal to take anything too seriously, made them unstoppable. Down in those tunnels, the Viet Cong faced men who were part soldier, part bushman, and part ghost. Men who could read the earth like a book, and men who refused to be broken. In the tunnels, you were alone, but you were never truly alone, because above you, at the entrance, your mates were waiting. The bond between tunnel rats wasn't just friendship. It was survival. One tunnel rat explained, "You trusted your mates with your life. Literally. When you went down, they held the rope. They listened for sounds. And if something went wrong, they came in after you. No questions asked." That trust was absolute. Communication was minimal. A tug on a rope, a tap on the ground, a whisper through a narrow shaft. But those signals meant everything. One tug, "I'm okay." Two tugs, "I need backup." Three tugs, "Get me out now." And if you signaled for help, your mates came, even if it meant crawling into the same death trap you were stuck in. One veteran recalled, "I got stuck once. Tunnel collapsed behind me. I thought that was it, but my mate squeezed through a gap I didn't even know was there, pulled me out by my boots. I owe him my life." Mateship wasn't a word. It was a code, a way of life. The tunnel rats shared everything: air, water, fear. When one man panicked, the others talked him through it. When one man got hurt, the others carried him out. No one was left behind, ever. This was more than military doctrine. This was Australian culture translated into combat. The same mateship that had sustained soldiers at Gallipoli, in the deserts of North Africa, in the jungles of Papua New Guinea. It was alive and well in the tunnels of Vietnam. Above ground, they coped together. They drank together, told stories, laughed at the absurdity of it all. One tunnel rat remembered their ritual. After every mission, we'd sit around, have a smoke, and someone would tell the worst story of the day. The bloke with the worst story got the first beer. It sounds mad, but it helped. We processed the fear together. They processed the fear together. That's the key. In those tunnels, mateship was more than camaraderie. It was a lifeline. It was the difference between living and dying. They'd write letters home together, help each other find the right words to explain what they were experiencing without terrifying their families. They'd share packages from home, Tim Tams, Vegemite, newspapers months out of date, but treasured nonetheless. They'd celebrate birthdays underground, passing around a shared cigarette or a nip of rum someone had smuggled in. Not everyone made it out. Some tunnel rats were killed by booby traps, others by cave-ins. A few simply vanished into the darkness and were never found. But their mates never forgot them. One veteran said, "We lost a bloke. Good soldier. Better mate. We tried to get him out, but the tunnel flooded. We couldn't reach him. I still think about him. All of us do." The brotherhood wasn't just about the living. It was about remembering the fallen, about carrying their memory through the mud and the darkness. The tunnel rats didn't fight for medals or recognition. They fought for each other, for the bloke next to them, the bloke above them, the bloke who'd pull them out if things went wrong. That's what made them unstoppable. Not skill, not courage, mateship. The statistics tell part of the story. Australian tunnel rats cleared over 300 tunnel complexes during the war. They captured tons of weapons, ammunition, and supplies. They retrieved thousands of pages of intelligence documents. They neutralized dozens of VC command posts. But the numbers don't capture the full impact. Consider what it took to become a tunnel rat. There was no formal training program, no course you could take. You learned by doing, and you learned from the men who'd survived. The first generation of tunnel rats figured it out through trial and error, paying for their education with blood and near misses. They developed their own techniques, their own protocols. They learned that you should always pause at tunnel junctions, listening for several minutes before proceeding. They discovered that wearing socks over your boots muffled your footsteps. They found that chewing gum helped equalize pressure in your ears and kept your mouth from going dry with fear. Some lessons were learned the hard way. Early on, tunnel rats would move quickly, trying to clear tunnels as fast as possible. They learned that speed got you killed. Slow and methodical was the only way. One veteran recalled spending 4 hours clearing a 50-meter section of tunnel, moving less than a meter every few minutes, checking and rechecking every inch. The physical toll was immense. Tunnel rats would emerge with their knees bloodied and raw from crawling through mud and rocks. Their hands would be cut and blistered. Their backs would be scraped from low ceilings. Some developed chronic respiratory problems from breathing the stale, contaminated air. Others suffered from claustrophobia that haunted them for years after they returned home. But they kept going back down. Why? Because someone had to. Because their mates needed them. Because the job wasn't finished. The tunnel rats also became experts at reading enemy behavior. They learned that the VC would often booby-trap the obvious routes through tunnels while leaving the difficult, seemingly impassable routes clear. So the tunnel rats would deliberately choose the hardest path, squeezing through gaps barely wide enough for a man, because they knew those were often the safest routes. They learned that the VC feared cave-ins as much as the Australians did, so they would reinforce critical sections with bamboo supports. When a tunnel rat found reinforced sections, he knew he was close to something important: a command post, a supply cache, a hospital. They learned the VC's habits. Most tunnels had multiple entrances and exits, and the VC would use them in predictable patterns. The tunnel rats would map these patterns, predict where the enemy would emerge, and set ambushes. The hunters became the hunted. The intelligence gathered by tunnel rats was invaluable. In one operation, they discovered documents detailing an upcoming attack on an Australian fire support base. The attack was thwarted, and dozens of Australian lives were saved. In another operation, they found maps showing the entire tunnel network in a region. allowing Allied forces to systematically clear and destroy the underground infrastructure. But perhaps the most important intelligence wasn't written down. It was the knowledge gained from simply being in the tunnels. The tunnel rats understood the VC's mindset, their tactics, their strengths and weaknesses. They knew how the enemy thought, how they moved, how they fought. This understanding informed every Australian operation in Phuoc Thu province. The tunnel rats also had to deal with the aftermath of their work. After clearing a tunnel, they had to decide what to do with it. Sometimes they would destroy it, collapsing it with explosives or smoke grenades. Other times they would leave it intact but booby-trapped, turning it into a death trap for the VC. And sometimes they would simply mark it and move on, knowing that the VC would be too afraid to return. The psychological warfare extended beyond the tunnels themselves. The Australians would leave messages for the VC crew drawings, sarcastic notes, even Australian coins as calling cards. These small acts of defiance reinforced the message. The tunnels aren't safe anymore. We've been here. We'll be back. One tunnel rat recalled leaving a note in Vietnamese that read, "The tunnel ghosts were here. Sleep well." It was found by VC soldiers weeks later, according to captured documents. The note reportedly caused panic, with several soldiers refusing to enter that tunnel complex again. The relationship between tunnel rats and their support teams was critical. While one man went down, several others remained above ground, providing security, managing communications, and preparing for rapid extraction if needed. These support teams were often just as stressed as the tunnel rats themselves. They'd sit at the entrance, listening to every sound, watching the rope for signals, knowing that their mate's life depended on their vigilance. One soldier who served as support for dozens of tunnel operations recalled, "The waiting was torture. You'd sit there, holding the rope, feeling every tug, every movement. And you'd think about what could go wrong. What if he runs into trouble? What if the tunnel collapses? What if I have to go in after him?" Those minutes felt like hours. The support teams developed their own rituals and superstitions. Some would tap the rope in specific patterns, a kind of Morse code reassurance. Others would smoke in sequence, timing their cigarettes to mark intervals. If a tunnel rat was down longer than expected, the tension above ground became almost unbearable. And when something did go wrong, the support team had to make split-second decisions. Do we go in now or give him more time? Do we send one man or two? Do we risk more lives to save one? These weren't theoretical questions. These were life and death choices made in real time, under pressure, with incomplete information. The tunnel rats also had to contend with the wildlife. The tunnels weren't just home to the Viet Cong. Snakes were common bamboo vipers, kraits, cobras. Some were venomous enough to kill within minutes. Rats, the actual rodents that gave the soldiers their nickname, were everywhere. Centipedes the size of your forearm, spiders that could fit in your palm, scorpions hiding in crevices. One tunnel rat had a close encounter with a bamboo viper. I put my hand on what I thought was a root. It moved. I jerked back and hit my head on the ceiling. The snake struck, missed me by maybe an inch. I could hear it hissing in the dark. I had to stay absolutely still, let it calm down, then inch backward. Took me 20 minutes to move 3 meters. My heart was pounding so hard I thought the VC would hear it. But perhaps the most insidious threat was the psychological toll. The darkness, the confinement, the constant danger it wore on men's minds. Some tunnel rats developed severe claustrophobia. Others had nightmares that lasted for years. A few simply couldn't do it anymore. reaching a breaking point where they physically couldn't force themselves back into a tunnel. There was no shame in that. The other tunnel rats understood. They'd all felt it, that moment when your body rebels, when every instinct screams at you to get out, to run, to escape. The difference was, some could push through it, and others couldn't. Those who couldn't were reassigned without judgment. No one questioned their courage. They'd already proven it by volunteering in the first place. The tunnel rats also had to adapt to the changing nature of the war. As the conflict progressed, the VC became more sophisticated in their tunnel defenses. They installed better ventilation systems, making it harder to smoke them out. They created false trails and dead ends, designed to confuse and delay. They even built underwater sections that could only be navigated by diving beneath flooded passages, surfacing in air pockets, then diving again. The Australians adapted in turn. They brought in engineers to help map tunnel systems using primitive sonar equipment. They experimented with different explosives to collapse tunnels more effectively. They even trained dogs to detect tunnel entrances. Though with limited success, the dogs often refused to approach the tunnels, sensing the danger. One innovation that proved particularly effective was the use of smoke grenades. The tunnel rats would drop smoke grenades into tunnel entrances, then watch the surrounding area for smoke emerging from hidden exits. This technique revealed the full extent of tunnel networks and helped the Australians understand just how extensive the underground infrastructure was. In some areas, they'd find a dozen exits from what appeared to be a single tunnel entrance. The cultural exchange, though adversarial, was fascinating. The tunnel rats came to respect their enemies' engineering skills and determination. The VC, in turn, developed a grudging respect for the Australians' courage and persistence. This mutual respect didn't soften the conflict. Both sides fought brutally, but it added a layer of professional acknowledgement rarely seen in war. Captured VC soldiers would sometimes ask to meet the tunnel rats who had cleared their complexes. They wanted to see the men who had accomplished what they thought was impossible. In one documented case, a captured VC commander told his interrogators, "We spent 2 years building that network. The Australians cleared it in 2 weeks. I must know how." The tunnel rats also dealt with the moral complexities of their work. They'd find personal effects in the tunnels, photographs, letters, simple possessions that reminded them that the enemy were human beings, not just targets. Some tunnel rats kept these items, not as trophies, but as reminders. Others left them undisturbed, a small gesture of respect for the dead. One tunnel rat found a photograph in a tunnel. It was a picture of a young woman holding a baby, someone's wife and child. I looked at it for a long time. Then I put it back where I found it. I don't know why. It just felt like the right thing to do. The work also required constant innovation in equipment. The standard issue torch was often inadequate, so tunnel rats would modify them, adding red filters to preserve night vision, or creating adjustable beams for different situations. Some fashioned primitive periscopes from mirrors and bamboo, allowing them to see around corners without exposing themselves. They developed specialized tools for specific tasks. Wire cutters, designed to work in confined spaces. Compact shovels, for clearing cave-ins. Even modified pistol grips that could be operated with one hand while the other held a torch. Every tool was tested in the field, refined, and passed along to other tunnel rats. The Australians also learned to use the tunnels against the enemy in creative ways. They'd sometimes use cleared tunnels as listening posts, positioning men underground to monitor VC communications and movements. Other times, they'd leave equipment in tunnels that appeared abandoned, then track where it ended up, mapping VC supply routes. As the war progressed, the tunnel rats became a tight-knit community within the broader Australian force. They had their own slang, their own traditions, their own hierarchy, based not on rank, but on experience and skill. A private who'd cleared 50 tunnels had more authority than a lieutenant on his first mission. This meritocracy was accepted and respected throughout the Australian units. They'd gather in the evenings, sharing stories, techniques, and warnings. Watch for the junction near grid reference XYZ. It's triple-trapped. The network around Ho Along has a false floor in the third chamber. This oral tradition kept everyone alive, spreading hard-won knowledge throughout the tunnel rat community. The psychological effect was immeasurable. The VC had relied on their tunnels for security, for sanctuary. When the Australians proved those tunnels weren't safe, it shattered VC confidence. They had to abandon positions they'd held for years. They had to constantly relocate, never certain when the tunnel ghosts might appear. One VC defector, interviewed after the war, said, "We feared the tunnels when the Australians came. Before, we felt safe underground. After, we never felt safe anywhere." When the war ended, the tunnel rats came home. Some were decorated. Most weren't. They didn't talk much about what they'd done. How do you explain crawling through hell to people who've never been there? For decades, their story remained largely unknown, overshadowed by bigger battles, louder headlines. But among those who knew, among the enemy who faced them, the legend endured. Today, the surviving tunnel rats are in their 70s and 80s, and when you ask them about their service, they don't talk about fear. They talk about their mates. One veteran reflected, "People ask me if I'm proud of what we did, and I am, but not because of the missions or the danger. I'm proud because I served alongside the best men I've ever known. Men who'd go into hell for you without a second thought. That's what I remember." The tunnel rats weren't superheroes. They were ordinary Australians who did extraordinary things. They volunteered for the most dangerous job in the war. They mastered an environment that terrified everyone else. And they did it with humor, humility, and an unshakable bond of mateship. The Viet Cong feared them because they were relentless, because they couldn't be intimidated, because they turned the tunnels, once a safe haven, into a hunting ground. By the end of the war, Australian tunnel rats had cleared hundreds of kilometers of tunnels. They captured vital intelligence, destroyed supply lines, neutralized command posts, and they did it with fewer casualties than any other tunnel force in Vietnam. Their legacy lives on. Modern Special Forces Australian Commandos, SAS, study the tactics and techniques pioneered by the tunnel rats. Confined space operations, psychological resilience, small unit cohesion. The lessons learned in those dark tunnels still shape elite soldiers today. The Australian Army's combat manuals include sections on underground operations based entirely on tunnel rat experiences. Special forces around the world study their methods. When urban warfare requires clearing buildings, sewers, and underground infrastructure, the principles remain the same. Slow movement, heightened senses, absolute trust in your team. One veteran, reflecting on his service, said, "We didn't think of ourselves as heroes. We were just doing a job, a bloody hard job, but we did it together." And that's what I want people to remember. Not the fear, not the danger, the mateship. That's what got us through. The Australians, the Viet Cong, feared underground. The men who descended into darkness and came back alive. The tunnel rats, unsung, unbreakable, unforgettable.